I'm going to stop right there for a second because we do have a bunch of hands up. So, Steve, can I get you to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. In regards to getting the honey off, so I've been using escape boards, but I'm finding that the board ends up on there. Like last year, they would rotate through, they would leave, I pull the honey off, no problem. This year, they're hanging out in there for upwards of 7 days. They're not going down the escape. And then when I finally get them off, using a brush or a fume board, the honey's super thick. So do you have a quick way of, if the escape boards aren't cutting it, what the best way to get the bees out and the supers off?
A leaf blower, a bee blower, or a leaf blower. What I use escape boards as well. I've used fume boards, but man, that stuff gets in your car. It's just that's just horrible stuff. So what I generally do is I try to get,
man, John, it's not that bad.
I try to get the bulk of the bees out of there off the get-go. And so I'll tip the honey super on its end and I will blast it with a leaf blower, and then I will you know, and with the remaining bees, there will be, then I'll use an escape board on that. The reason why that's effective is bees like to group. So if you have a honey super that's packed full of bees for whatever reason, when the night chill comes on, they're not driven towards the heat of the brood nest. They just kind of clump together. And although over time you'll still start to shed bees, it's still not very expedient. Also, man, you need a hole the size of a pencil. You have one super on that stack that has one tiny crack in it, not quite aligned, has a little knot hole. Those bees just keep flying in and out of that during the day. And later on in the season, that's a robbing portal. You know, I have screwed up and I've had a knot hole in a honey super and it just gets robbed right out. So try that.
You can get too. I have a question about that, John. Sure. When you put your escapes on, where are you placing the escape? Is it on top of the queen excluder, or is it on top? Where exactly is that when you're placing your escape?
I take the queen excluder off simply because if you've got a bee escape board there, she's not coming up, right? And I find I find it.
I forget who asked the question. Sorry.
It turns around, and because at that time of the season, those queen excluders are pretty caked up with the wax anyway. All you're doing is creating bottlenecks for those bees to get out of those honey supers.
Yeah, sometimes I've tried leaving some space, like leave a recycled super, empty super, a light super. You take the top box that maybe doesn't have much in it, throw that thing on the queen excluder, put the escape on top of that. It just helps give those bees somewhere to go, because I find that there's a real traffic jam under that bee escape sometimes, and so I don't think that's very helpful.
No, that's not a bad idea. I'll also sometimes use two bee escapes, one on the top, one on the bottom, so that the top entrance is still active, where if they're still drying some honey down, there's some airflow possibilities. But a lot of people don't have enough bee escapes. So if you're making bee escapes for sale this winter, Brad, you should be hitting people up.
You got it.
Laura, you had your hand up. Can you unmute?
Yeah. So this spring, I thought my apivar strips were not working, but I looked closer, and what I thought I was seeing as mites were actually bee lice. So just for people to realize that those do exist, and they look very similar.
Oh, yeah. Derek, can you, what are bee lice? Quick little synopsis, and why are they not harmful?
Yeah, a bee louse is it's actually a wingless fly. Braula sica is the scientific name. We actually, I don't know if this was the first reported incident in Manitoba, but the University of Manitoba got some packages in from Australia one year, and we noticed what looked like mites, but we had a closer inspection, and they were actually bee lice. And they're actually not a super big problem as varroa mites are. They actually kind of ride along top of the bee, and they will actually just steal food out of the bee's mouth. A lot of the times you'll find a lot of lice on top of the queen, because the queen is being fed by all these bees. And so we've seen in some cases 10, 12 lice on top of a queen, and they look a lot like mites, same color, pretty much the same size. They stand a little bit higher, and they're often, yeah, they can look a lot like mites, especially in an alcohol wash. If you're shaking your bees and you see these brown specks that, you know, they're not pollen, but beekeepers often mistake them for mites. So just, yeah, they are in Manitoba, and just be aware of them, and try not to confuse them with mites.
Not every beekeeper has a microscope, but I'm telling you, every beekeeper should. And we're not talking you need to invest $2,000 into some higher end model. I have a USB microscope, you know, which cams up to my PC, and it's not very expensive, but I can identify the difference between a louse and a mite. I can identify pollen grains in honey that's coming in. It's a really handy tool. So if you invest $100, you can really kind of open up some doors and get more sleep at night, because I have seen bee lice, and it scared the hell out of me. And I, not personally, not in my colonies, but I believe someone sent me a picture, and it was like, oh my God, when you see a pile of, like Derek said, a pile of these on the queen, it's almost like you want to like burn the village, because it's like, what the hell? But so it's yeah, it's nice that they're not very harmful in a way. How do bees get rid of them, or is this a self-solving problem, Derek, or is there a treatment for these?
The typical varroa treatments usually will kill them, although they do seem to survive a lot of the treatments more than the mites actually do too. So I don't know, Rael, do you have anything else to say about lice?
Say that they do respond to some of the mite treatments, but it doesn't seem like the mite treatments are as efficacious against louse as they are for varroa. So Laura, you're not the only one that has run into that situation. We've had a few other contacts in the past where they felt that we had resistance, and sure enough, it wasn't actually mites, it was actually louse.
Yeah, I just posted a link. If you scroll down on that page, there's a good picture of varroa versus a louse.
Yeah, it freaked me out quite a bit. And even just a kid's microscope was really effective in being able to diagnose it. Like a $35 Toys R Us kids one worked. So,
Yeah, or just a magnifying glass even too.
yeah, like I think it was times 40, and those worked too. But
yeah.
Florent, you had a question? Can you unmute your mic?
Yeah, we were just wondering if it's a little change of subject here. We've got a couple of hives that seem to want to requeen themselves. Is this going to be a problem for us going into winter?
If they're superseding, no. There is a bit of a rush, because I mean, as the season shuts down, they generally start shutting drones out. But I think if a colony knows that there is a queen on the way, they're not, you know, your drone population should be able to hold steady. Where are these supersedure cells? Like, I mean, if you pull a frame with them on them, where are they located?
They're right in the middle of the frame. Like they're not swarm cells at all. They're actually right in the middle of the frame.
I generally counsel to let nature kind of go. If you wanted to take complete control of the situation, you could requeen yourself. You could pick up some queens and remove the cells on your own. When you're seeing supersedure cells, the colony is telling you that there's something wrong with the current queen. And we may not be able to tell, you know, she might be appearing the brood pattern's fine, you know, the offspring are fine, they're docile, it was a good producer, but the bees know better than we do because they're detecting something. If they are not swarm cells, really you can either let them be. How strong are these colonies?
I would say they're all pretty strong. Like one of them for sure is a 2-year-old queen that's decided to
Yeah, well, that's time.
to do
That's
it.
time.
But we got new queens too.
And we've had the odd new queen from this year wanting to requeen itself.
Well, you want to keep an eye on it. You want to make notes on when you first saw it or when you first saw it completely capped. You do, using a calendar and the math, try to extrapolate when it is when it should be hatched and out, because what does happen in supersedure situations, of course, when that queen hatches out, you know, she can get eaten on a mating flight, right? And then all of a sudden you're noticing no eggs, no brood in your colony. So you have to monitor the situation to make sure that your intervention isn't necessarily required. But so really just keep an eye. I would let nature take its course and then just keep an eye on it. It is a lot more difficult to find mated queens in the fall. Most beekeepers have stopped producing queens. It's a lot more difficult to raise queens not in a honey flow. So they do become scarce. But it is especially when you, like Waldemar, for instance, who is a breeding professional, may have them later. But you're also in the fall when you're hunting for queens to buy. You're also, it's like trying to buy a snowblower in a blizzard. They are in high demand and they get snapped up pretty quickly. Keep an eye on the situation and hopefully things will work out on their own. But if you want to do, if you want to, but if you want to intervene, like if you want to requeen yourself, then you've got to make that decision a lot sooner than later, for sure.
Well, the couple that we have that have done it themselves already, they seem fine and the hive is still going. So I was just wondering, it just seems late in the season to me is all.
Well, I mean, the situation evolves as the situation evolves. If that queen, is there something wrong with her? Is she, her pheromones are starting to fail? If she's running out of spermatoza, you know, if the queens decide that she needs to be replaced, it's this is sort of the last period where she can be. Supersedure is usually quite seamless and is the best way. Because there's very little interruption at all if everything goes as nature dictates. But that queen needs to hatch out, that queen needs to have a viable mating flight, and then everything is fine. If weather doesn't interrupt that, and again, it's only the 12th of August, it should be okay. But as the season winds down, the windows for recorrection become smaller and smaller. Everything should be fine. But that being said, beekeeping is full of lovely surprises, and monitoring the situation as closely as possible is the best thing that you can do right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Who was next? Murray Smith? Murray, can you unmute your mic? And if your question's been answered, guys, please lower your hand.
John, I'm just going to jump in here. I'm going to have to bow out.
No, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the time you guys, have a great rest of the summer, and we will see you hopefully at the Red River meeting in September.
You bet. Yeah. Good
All
to
right.
see everyone again, and good luck with the fall management.
All right. Take care, Derek.
You need me to stick on for a little longer? I can if you want.
You can if you like. If you're busy, that's okay. We're just going to go over some treatment options, or sorry, some follow up on feeding, and it's just the rest is just going to be Q&A. So it's sort of a rudderless ship. If you can stick around, great. If you have to bow out, Riel, I really do appreciate the time you're able to carve out for us today.
I'll stick around till 9:30, then I'll probably pull the plug.
Awesome. Thank you. Murray Smith, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just I tried to replace a queen, and I killed the old queen and introduced a new one, and she was not accepted. So I found a bunch of queen cells there. Now I decided to let this nature take its course and those queens to hatch out. But all the old cap brood is being hatched out. I'm afraid that area is going to get plugged up with. I'm starting to feed them, feed the hive now too. And how do I make sure that I got room for that new queen to have enough brood space to lay eggs?
Stop feeding. Right. Like, I mean, stop feeding, because there will be space if they've got nothing to plug it up. Where are you located, Murray? Like, what's in your area?
About 10 miles west of Winnipeg. So there's no canola left around, but I'm on the Assiniboine River.
Okay,
if you want to call it a river.
So you still have some flora out there, and not enough for a flow, but enough for them to either maintain their weight or it'll just decrease slightly. So I would stop feeding to ensure that you've got some space. Also, remember that you can add space, right? If you got to keep an eye on on those queen cells. You have to remember to when you saw them first. And the crucial date is when were they capped?
And and I think that she should have gone on her mating flight by now.
Okay, so add a few days and you should be seeing some signs of that queen getting put back to work. She has to be mated, she has to be fed up, she has to start laying those eggs. But if you find that there's no place for her to lay, of course that's going to be a huge problem, but you can take frames out and add empty brood frames in. Stop your feeding, add in some space. You can take those frames that have nectar and have honey, and as long as they don't have brood in them, you can put them aside. If the feed's really liquidy in there and you're worried about fermentation, you can freeze them and save them for another time. But you want to make sure that she has open cells, because if she is honey bound, mated or not, if she's got no place to lay, that's you're unplugging the machine, so to speak.
Right. Okay. How many frames of would you add of empty brood frames?
I would start with 2. And what you can do is to keep the brood nest cohesive, usually on a single or a double, it's frames like 1 in 10. The ones at the very, very edges, those are feeding frames anyway, right? Pull those out. They should be just wall-to-wall honey and capped. And then you can just, push the frames aside, make some space in the middle, and slot in some empty frames there. That's generally how I do it. That's generally how I do it.
Did they not also need pollen for protein? So you would put a protein bucket nearby?
There should be.
If they need it, they'll take it.
Yeah, there should be pollen already in there. Like, I mean, if they've bound up everything.
If they're honey bound, they're screwed.
If they're honey bound, yeah, you're relieving that. Whether there's pollen or not in there, you're only doing 2. You're only doing 2 frames. There should be pollen on the other frames, and if there's pollen out there, they should be bringing it in.
Absolutely.
Like they're going to put some nectar in that empty frame you put in, but they should be doing it in the ring fashion, right? Leaving the very center of it open for the queen to lay, then a ring of resources, nectar, and then pollen there. And they can always pull it from other frames. You just want the space. Queen
Yeah.
comes in, there's no space, you're dead in the water. You have to have space. And this kind of ties in with our feeding, right? People like, bees are gluttons. Bees will squirrel away as much feed as they possibly can. You can control how much feed that goes into that hive by how much access you're giving those bees to it. If you're turning around and you're barrel feeding in a yard, that's full throttle. If you're putting a huge amount of a huge feed pail on top, that's full throttle. But if you're doing a inside frame feeder or a Boardman feeder where they can only so much can get accessed at a time, there's still a trickle coming in, which keeps, ringing those cherries that they know that there is some feed out there. That's sort of what you want this time of year. Generally speaking, the last week of August, you should be feeding for your winter feed. But right now you're trying to supplement whatever flow is out there, but you don't want to bung up that brood chamber. You really don't want to do that, because you'll have a dead out and you'll wonder, well, how could they have starved to death? There's feed all over the place. There's honey all over the place, but you didn't have enough bees to run that marathon. And it's a balance, and it can be tricky, especially in years like this. But again, the key here is monitoring. Don't be leaving, go into that colony and see what's going on there. Watch the landing board, right? See how much pollen's coming in. Find whatever floral sources are in your area and look at and see if the bees are collecting from that.
Will the new queen immediately start laying winter bees starting end of August?
Winter bees are made depending on when the queen is laying. Like it's what the colony needs. So yeah, basically speaking, they'll start wintering. She'll start laying, or they'll start raising winter bees. My biology's a little sketchy here. I don't think the queen decides to start making winter bees. An egg's an egg. It's how they're fed. Someone will have to step in here with a little bit more knowledge than me.
They are physiologically different a little bit because of their storage of the fat body.
But we're talking from the egg. We're talking from the egg here.
Yeah, and I don't know where that change happens. An egg can become a queen or a worker, so there's a lot of DNA expressive differences there, and I guess winter bee might just be a third one.
Is it just what they feed them that makes them get the bigger fat bodies?
That's a hell of a good question.
All the cues in your hive that when the brood production starts to go down and the amount of activity outside the hive goes down, you got all these pheromone changes. They start, and the nurse bees are not having to feed a lot of brood. They start to build up these proteins and these fats in their blood and in their fat body, and they start building up basically a fat in their system. That's what turns them into a winter bee.
So simply put, Murray, yeah, she will. That should work out that way.
Oh, okay.
Veronica, you had your hand up. You can never find the mute button when you need to, eh, Veronica? That's okay.
Got it. Okay.
There you go.
Blah, blah, blah. And I'm not even looking. So no, I have my question. And Brad answered that he's doing it. I'm just looking to watch somebody do it because I've never done it and I want to try it this year. And I don't have a fumigation tool.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I'd like to learn and hopefully be able to adapt that to my own situation. And Brad said that he would let me watch. I could watch him, but he has a different kind that I'm getting. So
yeah, I do oxalic acid vaporization as well. The tool I bought was online from a guy in Vancouver that built them.
Oh, is this the hyalizer?
No. Like anything else, they will bell and whistle the hell out of everything. This was simply an aluminum flash pan with a couple of electrodes, and it worked quite well. However, I have seen those other units and I am kind of jealous, so I'll poo-poo them. In the end, those, you know, you would think $159 is pretty expensive, but when you consider oxalic acid is like 3 cents a colony to treat, it does pay for itself pretty quickly in comparison to other forms. Oxalic acid is a wonderful tool to have in your mite treatment kit, bar none. It is not the silver bullet. It is not going to replace your other treatments, but it is definitely a good go-to, and knowing how to do it and having that in your arsenal is pretty crucial, because there are certain times of year, if you need to knock down your mites like that, that's your go-to, oxalic acid vaporization. Because even if you had your mites are going crazy in the middle of a honey flow, you can remove your honey supers, knock down a pile of the mites that, not the ones in your brood, but the ones that are running around, and sort of, get some treatments in, and then just put those honey supers right back on like the very next day. So it's by all means, invest the money in a good vaporizer, learn how to do it, because it is a very good treatment to have in your rotation.
The only thing I would add to that is spend your money on a respirator as well too.
Oh yeah, and
you can't undersell the fact that if you take up a big breath of oxalic acid, it is way worse than formic acid for your health. So anybody using these vaporizers needs to take extra precautions for themselves to make sure that they don't, breathe up any of this stuff, because it will scar your lungs.
And the cartridges in those masks, organic acid or acid specific, do your research, buy the right filter. Don't have one for dust, because people don't realize that when you're dealing with any kind of a filtration, those filters are the ones that keep out, some are absolutely useless when you're using other materials. I'm not blasting, but there was a bee supply store that was selling the wrong filters for a while. They just didn't know. You can get them on Amazon as well, and your health is not worth cutting corners here. Oh, the wind's blowing the other direction. Don't be a fool. This stuff will hurt you, and I've caught a blowback from before. And yeah, it's your lungs get burnt, and don't mess around with safety, especially.
I want to echo in that too, John. Do not underestimate that. I wear, because I do so many colonies, I wear a rather expensive and high quality full face respirator system, and the eye protection as well, because sometimes you can get splatters, and especially with the ProVap that I use, once in a while the cap will pop off the thing. But even with that high quality respirator system, at the end of the day, my voice sounds different, and there's only one reason that would be, you're going to get a little bit of it here and there, and Riel's right, that stuff will burn your esophagus, your lungs, it'll scar you, you'll never recover from that.
The material safety data sheets are available online for almost everything. And when you're dealing with 4 or 6 colonies, it's one thing, but when you're dealing with 20 or 40 or 50 or 400 or 1,000, it's the cumulative effects become very apparent. If you take a look at an Apistan package, it'll say only handle so many colonies worth of these strips in a day. Because even though you're wearing gloves or regular protection, you're touching, and all of a sudden that stuff builds up. I will never use Kumafloss again, ever. I treated a yard of 25, and I didn't wear a mask, but I did wear like rubber gloves. But I must have absorbed enough of this stuff where I felt sick for a couple of days. And I'm sure I could have been wearing a respirator, and I'm sure I could have been taking greater care, but you are dealing with something that kills things. And just because you're too big for it to kill you doesn't mean it can slap you around a bit. So please be careful. Formic acid as well. I mean, it's not as volatile, but you can get a good huff of those vapors, especially if you're doing it on a very warm day, and you'll know it. Just take care. You are dealing with a concentration, even if it's just because it's an organic acid doesn't mean it's a safe one.
A little whiff of formic acid is like drinking a cup of vinegar. Well, I imagine it would be. I haven't drank a cup of vinegar, but
that formic acid, that blast of formic acid that has that acidity, actually causes you to your reaction when you breathe it in is actually to constrict. It's kind of like trying to smell ammonia. You'll smell it, but often you won't just take a big deep breath of it, because your body will kind of freeze up. Oxalic acid does not give you any kind of response, so you would just breathe in the whole thing. And I've had a lot of people say, I just hold my breath when I use it. But the problem with holding your breath is you got to breathe eventually, and usually heavier than if you didn't hold your breath. So if you don't time it right, you're going to take it in a big blast. So it really is worth investing in a good respirator. And the rating for the cartridges, P100. It has to meet the P100 rating. P100.
Just to touch base on formic acid. Formic acid is a very inexpensive and very effective form of mite control. The downside of formic acid is it is temperature sensitive, where its efficacy goes down significantly during cooler temperatures. And we have had some just bizarre weather this summer. We have had days of 35, 36 degrees Celsius. If you're using formic acid when you get to the 30 degrees Celsius mark, and who knows if we'll hit that this again or not, but that's where formic acid starts to get tricky, because when at those temperatures, it tends to release faster, which with formic acid, you want a longer release, potent enough to kill the mites. And then, but that curve has to be, when you've put it on, it's a little high and then it drifts down, and that's where you're going to get your maximum mite kill. If you put on formic acid and it's 34 degrees Celsius and your hives are standing in the open sun, that spike, that curve is going to be more like a spike. And then you can have queen damage. You can be killing a lot of your bees. You have to be very, very aware of the forecast and the temperatures when you're applying formic acid. And that is, and I'm talking if you are applying it onto your own pads. That's if you're buying a pre-made patty. That's formic acid just in general. Also, that being said, if you're doing it and the weather is very cool, you may need to leave that treatment pad on longer, so the efficacy of the killing the mites has a bigger window, because that formic acid will evaporate out of that pad a lot slower. Well, how do you tell? Well, damn it, you monitor. You do not treat, I don't care what you're treating with. You don't just throw a treatment in there and expect it to work as the manufacturer intended. You have to, there's a reason why we have bottom screen boards or sticky pads. There's a reason why we do sugar rolls and alcohol washes, is you have to monitor your mites, and you should know what your mite load is before your treatment and after your treatment. And that's even if you're doing it prophylactically, because if you don't know, you can't intervene. You can treat with Apistan, you can treat with formic acid, but if it doesn't do a really good job of killing those mites, you will have a small window, an opportunity where you can do another treatment. Oxalic acid, for instance, I've treated on the 1st of November, because you can actually do that. But if you don't know that you've got a mite problem after your treatment, then you're just basically leaving things up to chance. And the powers above that determine, that oversee beekeeping hate laziness and procrastination. And that'll kill more bees than anybody or anything, anytime. Feeding. Hardcore, I need to get weight into my colonies, and the syrup reduced down by the bees. That's it used to be sort of the 1st of September thing, but it's almost like the last week of August thing, where you should be feeding for reals. Now, there are people that will keep their feed. I didn't use all this feed in the fall, so I'm going to feed it back to them in the spring. That's something I really, really don't agree with. And yeah, there's some gray areas there, but really don't. I have all this feed left over from the spring. I'm going to feed it to them in the fall. Okay, but before you do that, fill up a pint glass and drink it. And, drink it. You drink it. You want them to drink it, you should drink it, right? Because if it's off or fermented, or if you had put medication into it, I know you might be throwing out quite a bit, but if fresh feed, right? Fresh feed. You're setting these guys up to be on their own for months and months and months of no flying in winter, whether it's indoors or outdoors, and you want to make sure that they're provisioned the best possible way. If you're using old feed, in my opinion, that is definitely a mistake. Gauge it the best you can. And you know what? Just because you've got a 2.5 gallon feeding pail doesn't mean you have to fill it up every time. You can put a little bit in there. You can switch over from feeding pails to smaller feeding pails. You can switch it over to frame feeders. Frame feeders or hive top feeders, you can control the amount of feed getting in there just by how full you fill them up. You can make room for frame feeders by pulling out that number 1 and number 10 honey bound frame, putting those off to the side. You can put them back in later, make room for that frame feeder. The more effort you put into it, the more observation you put into it, the more fine tuning you can do on your wintering program, and the better success that you're going to have. But results have a price, and that price is time. You have to invest the time into it, right? So if you don't invest the time into it, you can't fine tune your sugar consumption, and you end up throwing out more feed, right? You try to recover that mistake by feeding old feed the next season over, and it can cause dysentery. Put in the time. That's the magic. You've got to put in the time. I can't stress that enough. When you're using pail feeders on top of your colonies, It's pretty standard to put an empty honey super on top of that with the lid. It helps decrease some robbing, but as well, you don't have that fluctuation effect where the cool nights compared to the warmer days cause contraction and expansion of that pail, which will cause syrup to pour out and leak onto your bees. So make sure, you know, putting that little extra, you know, that sun guard, that empty super and a lid on top of that will help mitigate that a bit. I don't particularly like pail top feeders simply because even though they're very, very popular, especially in commercial operations, because they stack up, they don't take up a lot of room, they're easily washed, and they're cheap. I prefer hive top feeders. And for the hobbyist and the novice, it's what I recommend for a couple of reasons. One, you can access it without disturbing your bees later on in the season. Two, you can control easily the amount of feed that's going in there as the situation warrants. And three, because it is a hive top feeder, it helps the syrup gets some caloric heat in there so that it doesn't have that temperature fluctuation. And when it's cooler outside, they'll still draw feed quickly because that syrup isn't as cold as it would be in a pail. Frame feeders to me are a bit of a pain simply because you now have to go into the colony to service them. But again, it does keep the syrup warm, they feed easily, and you can control it. What works best, or what is best, is what works best for you, no one else. If I know if bees are bees are particularly thirsty or desperate for feed, I still have Boardman feeders they'll throw on a colony or two just to see how they react to it. If there's a huge honey flow going on and you put a Boardman feeder on during the day, they won't touch it. They don't want potatoes when they can eat steak. They will take it at night because they're not flying. So, but if you see them not taking feed during the day, it's because they've got better fish to fry. It's the same thing with pollen. It's a question I get quite often. Should I be feeding pollen in the fall? The answer is, what are you seeing in your colony? Are they really low on pollen reserves? Is there a dearth of pollen in your area? Are you watching your landing board? Are there bees coming in with pollen? You have to be able to answer all of those questions. To me, a good indicator, this is, I stole this unabashedly from Dr. Curry, is I'll throw some bee pro in a bucket and I'll wedge it in a fork of a tree. And if the bees are desperate for pollen, they'll go and they'll forage that. If they're not desperate for pollen, they tend to leave it alone because, again, it's not particularly attractive to them unless they're in need. It's the same thing. If you put a pollen patty on your colonies in the fall and they're not particularly fond of it, they may take some of it, but they generally don't really like it. So, you know, there's a good indicator by observation, knowing where your bees are at by their behavior, and also pulling those frames. What do you see? You know, have they backfilled? Is there a ring of pollen around the edge? If so, you're doing great. So again, there is no canon law where you should be feeding by this date, you should be feeding pollen by this date. It's all situational, and you have to know what your situation is. Any of the veterans have anything else to add on to that, or to correct any mistakes my rambling rant was? Huh?
You're rambling pretty good there.
How are you doing, Waldemar?
Not bad. How are
No,
you?
I gotta say it was very informational.
Yeah, but it's informational is great unless it's wrong. So, and again, I mean, you know, there is no one beekeeper with all the answers. So listening to the more veterans you can kind of steal from the better. So Waldemar, how are things going in your yard this week?
Oh, keeping busy. Slow down a little bit, but overall it was an interesting season. Not only with the beast itself, but just the way it started out, I think, and the the amount of suppliers that we had one of a sudden in this province of queens coming from across the world. I counted about 9 in the springtime. So I think there will be interesting outcomes, and listening to you guys discussing all of this, I think you left the genetics completely out of the situation, because you're describing hives in an ideal situation where you have a brood pattern and you have pollen around and you have the honey on top of it. If you have anywhere from between a buckfast queen or Italian Langustica in there, that doesn't look completely what you described. That becomes to be something completely different. But that's beside the point. Back to your comments on the feed. Actually, if you have a significant amount of food left and it's late enough in the fall time, you can actually put that liquid into a plastic drum and leave it in a cold building and let it freeze, and come springtime around, it melts out again, and you add a little bit more sugar to it and you can basically feed it back. Now, if it goes the other way around, I totally agree with you. I would not keep anything from the spring into the fall, because you usually get fermentation on that and that becomes to be an issue. You guys also been knocking around a little bit on the strips there. One big thing that is actually being completely ignored, and I see it over and over again. The strips have taps, and most of the people would use those taps, break them out and hang the strips in between the frames. What that tap does, actually, it pushes the strip onto the one side of the frame. So it means actually you have only 50% efficacy on that strip. The strips also have small holes in them. So you take a toothpick and you leave that tap in place, and then you put that strip between frames where it's accessible from both sides. So you actually have a possibility of that chemical working in your hive. Just a few things that have been not touched on, and yeah. But
no, definitely appreciate it. There's
yeah, like I've been talking to many commercial beekeepers that have been purchasing foreign queens last year already, and a lot of those hives did not make the winter.
No,
like we're getting new suppliers into the country from Europe. There is no winter there. Those bees don't know nothing when to shut down, and you end up with something like that. Well, that queen is gonna breed into December, and as much as you're gonna feed, there will be nothing left.
I've always been a proponent of local stock. I think there's so much of an advantage. I know there is the appeal for trying out a brand new queen, like it's a brand new sports car. But
absolutely.
You know what? If you buy a Lamborghini and you drive it on Winnipeg roads, you're not going to have an undercarriage, even though it's a really nice car. And a very good point, Waldemar, where when you've got queens from a different hemisphere or from a different continent where the winter climate is so different or the breeding cycle is so different, that's a lot to unlearn, and it's not done. You know, when you're buying a mated queen, you're buying that genetic set, and it's going to do what it knows what to do, and it will not necessarily fit into your program. A lot of beekeepers will buy unique queens from abroad just because they kind of want certain aspects of those genetics maybe into their, but that is really high-end master beekeeping. And so often during some of these webinars and seminars and what we teach, especially to the novices, we'll sort of very much touch on or just whitewash over some really in-depth topics like genetics, because we're doing a deep dive into really specific categories, which some novice beekeepers just aren't ready yet. Some experienced beekeepers aren't ready yet, but absolutely local queens will perform better on your program because you live here and they were raised here. And I've always pushed as well, learning how to raise your own queens gives you the best advantage of in beekeeping, because then you've got the flexibility to requeen when you want, and you'll know your genetics as well. So all very, very good points.
And just one more thing, you don't raise queens in August anymore.
No.
It's a no-no, because you are usually running into a trouble.
Poor mating, or
not only mating. Well, you need to have at least 18 degrees Celsius. You have to have a certain amount of drones out there. And basically, if she starts beginning of August, it takes 16 days until she actually hatches. Then it takes another 10 days by the time she's mating. So you're looking at 26 days, and it takes another 3 days until she starts laying.
Okay, so we had a person.
Then you add another 21 days to that. When are you gonna get bees?
Okay, so we had a question earlier on. I'm not sure if you had logged on in time or not. Where someone.
Murray?
Yeah.
No, it's me.
Okay.
I've got a queen that seems to be failing, but I'm stuck in Toronto right now, and I won't get home until middle of August 19th, and that's not, it's nothing I can do about it. But and I understand what you're saying, but that's the best I can do, but I think my queen is failing. So what's the better thing to do? Is try and go through the winter with her, or get a new one?
Well, is she really failing, or is just not producing enough pheromones? That's a different story altogether.
You're right. I think she's just weak.
Well, how is the population in the hive?
It's weak. It's weak. It's not great. Like, I've got 2 hives right beside each other, and I only have 2 because I'm just a backyard beekeeper. But one, I've got 4 supers on it, and the other one I've got 2, and there's very, very little brood, and it's not doing very well.
Because sometimes you think just because the other one is booming beside it, that's not necessarily always.
I totally agree.
A reflection on the other one, but
no,
the thing is, a hive that actually will have in September approximately 6 frames of kept brood will make the winter without problems. This is what you need. You can make up basically a hive in September. You can collect 6 frames of brood with bees and give them a fresh queen. Put another 4 empty frames in that box and feed them. They will be having a super hive coming out of the winter. That's all you need. You need only 6 frames of kept brood in September. Beginning of September is plenty enough. It doesn't have to be in the middle or at the end.
No, but right now it's just there's doesn't seem like a lot of brood. It's very lots of empty holes, lots of empty spaces.
Yeah, I'm not excluding the failing.
No,
but this thing is, if they're raising their own, then I guess you take a chance on it. But this is Manitoba, and I've seen last year it was pretty much tough to actually finish feeding because it got so cold, and the way the weather pattern was until now. Everybody seems to forget what happens on the 21st of June, because I remember it's very well that because in Gimli there was a report of frost on the ground. And I had to go that day to put queen cells into my mating boxes. Well, I had to actually take a water bottle, put hot water or warm water in it, put it in a cardboard box, cover it up with towels and put my queen cells on there and walk out there and actually insert the queen cells into the, the weather pattern that we are actually having here. We have to consider it on an ongoing basis too, just because yesterday was 36 and today it's 10, right? So that's my point. If you start actually pushing August for queens, you might get lucky, but this is not a guarantee.
Now,
No.
now, Waldemar, we had another person that's on that had super seizure cells. So they had an active queen, but the colony is looking to replace her. What do you think the odds are of that working out satisfactory? Because those cells, those super seizure cells, are capped now. But do you think, if we had average weather, that she would able to hatch out, mate, and do that succession? Or
it's a pretty good chance. Basically, if a hive, and that also depends on genetics, and nature, those hives would normally not survive. But because we bred so long for a certain trait in the bees, if the queen is still in the hive, it's basically a quiet supersedure. It's a replacement. So even if that queen, the young queen, is gonna hatch and not mate, then they actually keep the old one. But if she actually gonna go for a mating flight and the old one continues to laying, you're gonna have actually two queens for a certain period of time within the hive itself, and that confuses the experienced beekeepers. Never mind the novice.
Yeah, I remember a picture you sent me once, and it was like, oh my god.
they're basically walking on top of each other and don't do nothing to each other. That queens are always fighting is also an invention of a old style beekeeping idea.
So it's not too late to have a new queen?
No, especially if the other hive is booming, you can always steal a couple of frames of brood from there, support it, and let her go into the winter.
Okay. Oh, thank you. That's very good information.
Oh, that's hope, dude. That's hope. But Manitoba, like as Waldemar said, Manitoba weather is a heartbreaker. So again, there's a certain amount of beating the odds, and if things go well, listen, we could have a beautiful September. It could be just warm. We could even have a little bit of a flow. It's happened before. There's nothing off the table. But you have to almost start, you have to almost prepare for the worst case scenario if you want to have the best odds of survival.
My two hives are exact opposites of each other. The one hive is absolutely incredibly, like, just exploding. I've got 4 supers on it, and in a backyard in Winnipeg. And the other one, I've got 2 supers on it, and they're still not producing. So it's crazy. It is absolutely crazy.
It's one of the go ahead, Waldemar.
If there's no population, you cannot expect it.
I think you're right.
And sometimes the location of the hive itself will determine also which one is stronger. Which direction are your hives are actually facing?
Southwest.
Okay. So I'm assuming that the one on the east hand side is the stronger one.
Yeah, but they're only like 2 feet apart.
That doesn't make no difference.
Okay.
What you don't understand is the way bees are actually orientating themselves within the yard. The sun goes up in the east, so that hive will be always first active. It starts right away in the springtime. And basically, because it starts in the springtime, that queen will be a lot stronger within the pheromone production. So she will draw actually the bees from the neighbor's hive. So that's why you always will have a strongest hive on the east side if your bees are facing south.
Okay. I didn't know that.
It's the little things.
Oh,
and it's also like,
absolutely.
and keep in mind too, when you're a hobbyist, right? You know, you've got 2 colonies, you're setting them up in a small area, you're trying to not be invasive to your neighbors, you know, and all of these other boxes that you're trying to tick. But the sun, the solar gain is incredibly important. Wintering too, you know, we would always have 20 colonies on the edge of the machine shed, and just from the reflective energy from the sun in the winter, that group would always have the highest survivability because of just that one benefit gives them the advantage over some of the others that were, you know, in a grove of trees for the windbreak. It's something you have to factor in, but it's also something you can't always capitalize on. But the difference, like the amount of energy and planning that goes into setting up a commercial beekeeping yard, you know, for 40 or 50 colonies, there's a lot more to it than finding a chunk of land, throwing up a bear fence and plunking them down. Windbreaks, exposure to sun, there's more than a few factors that really can make or break a yard, or make a good yard great, or even a poor yard sustainable. So it's nice to have it in a shady location out of the way so it's private, but you know, solar gain, as Waldemar explained, is also pretty important too.
So, Waldemar, just to finish up, do you think that the difference in solar gain is enough to make it like not actually be a factor as the queen is failing?
Well, it'd be probably a part of it. How old is the queen? I need to have a bit more.
Less than 2 years.
Less than 2 years.
She was pretty healthy the first year, I have to say.
Okay.
And we did have, like, we had the hives turned opposite each other, and then we put them, so there is a very good chance of drifting, like colony drifting.
Mm-hmm. Well, the good thing is they're all yours, so you get all the benefits from it.
True.
But in reality, it's a possibility. I've seen yards with 4 hives in it, and basically the one on the west side was almost non-existing, and this guy was just furious about it because, well, I supplied 3 out of those 4 queens, and the one that was on the west side was one of my queens, and he said she was failing. So I just told him, I said, well, are there still bees in there? He says, yeah. I said, is the queen still laying? Yes. And she wintered well. I said, well, okay, she is way too young to fail, and I know she was from a good stock, so I suggested to him actually to make a nuke from the other ones, use that queen, and restart the hive. And come fall time, after I talked to him, he says actually that became to be his best hive overall, because when he brought that nuke back and put it back into a regular super, he relocated her actually, and had no issues. So that's how much drifting can actually influence a hive. But it's also, drifting has something to do with the amount of pheromones at a certain time of the year. And it's not only what the queen produces, but also the hive is being held together not by the queen pheromones, but by the brood pheromones.
Yeah.
That's the biggest factor. And if she is not capable in the springtime developing a bigger brood nest because her bees are drifting off to the neighbor, so her pheromone production on her own, plus the low brood production and low brood pheromone production, is not there. So she is losing on an ongoing basis bees.
That's the principle between jump starting a queen that's not laying by adding a frame of open brood.
Right.
That brood pheromone does cause a reaction. And keep in mind too, Dave, is that if you're looking for a silver bullet, a one-line explanation of why that hive isn't performing well, there isn't going, like everything that Waldemar said, it probably isn't just one factor that's causing that imbalance that you're seeing. It's probably, it could be partial queen, partial placement, partial this, partial that.
Yeah.
You can't turn around and in beekeeping and say, oh, that's the fix. It's usually a little bit more complicated than that. So when you're trying to devise your solutions, you should be pooling all of this information and advice that you're gleaning for the solution to it, because it's probably not a one shot fix.
Yeah. Well, the crazy part is that we had the hives turned around opposite each other last year. And the hive on the right was actually the weaker hive. So we turned around both into the sun. And now the hive on the right is like massively stronger. So I think exactly what you and Valdemar are saying is exactly right.
And your massively strong hive might be a massively strong hive. And you're also part of the situation is the contrast you're seeing between a below average performer and an exceedingly good performer. So you can, and that doesn't indicate that your poor performing hive is really shitty. It's just not, you know.
Oh, and I don't care about that. I just want it to survive the winter.
Well, no, but you should care about that, because it is like, well, I have beekeeper. I don't care about honey production. Good, but you know, if you're seeing something not right, you know, taking those steps to fix it, and what you're doing, you're on the right track. I'd like to open up the floor a little bit if for other questions. We glanced over a few topics, especially feeding. Everyone's program is different. So raise your hand if you have a specific question on feeding or on treatments, and we will try to, for the rest of this session, just do a Q&A. It's 10 o'clock right now. There isn't any fireworks or bloopers at the end of this movie. So, I mean, if you need to sign out, if you need to work tomorrow, if you've got a busy day, feel free. Like I said, this is being recorded. But if anyone has any questions, please, now is the time to raise your hand, speak up, or any observations, please let me know. Benadryl, Sudafed, ephedrine, that'll help clear that up, Denise. Just saying. The smoke this year was absolutely incredible. I think we had like, it was almost like between the amount of grasshoppers and the smoke, I was expecting it to rain frogs, for God's sakes. It was just a very, very difficult year. I cannot, I have so much sympathy, especially for first year beekeepers, but I swear to God, if you can make it through this, your tenacity will benefit you very, very much. I guess just to recap our winter seminar here, it's like, if you've got honey on your colony, leaving it on is the only thing that it's serving is your convenience. Get it off and get it extracted. Get into your bees. It's human nature that when you've got 4 honey supers on your colonies, you're not checking your brood chambers very well. It's a lot of work. Make it convenient, right? Try to get that honey off what you can, and then start taking a look. And it's all about observation, maintenance, and monitoring, and knowing where you're at. So that being said, I hope this was helpful. And again, questions, Dave?
I haven't been able to get home and get the honey off. How damaging is that?
Well, the more you push the window, like you have a window in August and September to get your bees ready for winter. Every day that goes by, that window shrinks. Your options become limited because your actions become less effective. The ability to correct mistakes or deal with happenstance shrinks. Your odds decrease. That's basically all of it in a nutshell. You might get lucky. And honestly, you can't get back here till the 19th. Life gets in the way, absolutely. But the end of that equation might be dead bees in the spring. And if you can't do anything about it now, it's not like you can hop on a plane and get here tomorrow. Then you're buying nukes, and we have a list of Red River, suppliers of good Manitoba raised
the
bees.
local nuke economy.
But honestly,
so Dave, just to speak to that, Dave, my flow where I am, it goes late, and I'm often pulling the last of my honey. I'm often pulling all of my honey last week in August. Okay, you have time. What John says is absolutely true, because when I pull that honey last week in August, I gotta have my ducks in a row. Like, I've got no chance to be making missteps. I got no chance to be being late with my feed pails. I've got no chance to be, not having my treatments in order and my mite testing in order and stuff. I gotta have my shit together, because if you don't, at that point, it's getting critical. You can't redo. You can get away with almost anything at the 1st of June in beekeeping, and that getting away with things declines dramatically as you approach Labor Day. And by the time you get to Labor Day, you can't get away with anything pretty much, right? So you have time. Don't sweat it. Just get your ducks in a row and get her done when you get back, because that's a week. That's a week tomorrow.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
Hey, Brad, when you pull your honey, you want to add what kind of a honey you're pulling there, because I know you're in an area where there is very little canola. You're actually pulling clover, right?
Yeah, no canola
or alfalfa. Any honey that is in that quality will not crystallize for a while.
Yeah.
So that has to be considered too. Those fine details cannot be left out.
Okay.
Yeah, canola honey, you don't want to leave that on there. I can get away with leaving clover honey, sweet clover honey. Alfalfa honey, I think too is okay, isn't it, Waldemar? Like, if there's any of that in the brood chamber. Yep. But if you're collecting canola and you're pulling the last week in August, you're just going to be pulling a bunch of crystallized frames is all you're going to get.
Yeah, no, I'm just in
I forget that regularly, because that's not me, right? I don't live that.
But it's not just a geography thing, although it usually is. It's also an annual thing. Like right now, the canola crop was quite compromised because of the drought. I do purchase honey from other beekeepers, especially the small ones that have too many hives produce too much honey for their own use, but they're not producing in drums or anything. So what I've noticed is that the smaller beekeepers, the hobbyists plus, and the urban beekeepers, the ones that are in very much like the Winnipeg setting, the honey this year has been absolutely phenomenal in taste and quality, and it is directly attributed to the lack of canola in it. Just spectacular stuff. So it is one of those really interesting years where, in Brad's situation, it's his geography that allows him to have that benefit in his program. But for other beekeepers, it's probably going to be a bit of a saving grace as well, because canola wasn't as predominant as a nectar source in some areas this year. And again, that's rainfall specific, and it's never a hard rule. But I have noticed, especially in small batch, small lots, the honey quality has been superb.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. But I don't think actually that canola was not prevalent. I think what you see is actually a bigger blend.
Yeah.
Because canola was at least area that I am in and further north, it's a lot later than usual. And so when the bees actually started to have a honey flow, mainly it was clover and wildflowers. And then when canola started coming in, it became to be a blend. And the blend, like you noticed, it's an excellent taste, excellent flavor and smell, and it also is very light.
As well, there are certain plants that weather drought conditions a lot better. Alfalfa has a deeper root system, so does sweet clover. And so those are plants, and just because it's blooming and looks healthy doesn't mean it's secreting the usual amount of nectar either, right? So there's a lot of factors. Like I would see soybean fields, which are not great nectar producers anyway, but I've seen ones that look great, and then a mile down the road, ones that looked like war zones. And I don't know if it was just a rain cutoff or it was the time that was planted, but
that's
God.
usually what it was, actually, the planting time. Anything that has been planted a little bit later suffered a lot, but I was surprised that they actually came still through. And but if you look at the crops in the fields, the amount of plants standing is probably a third less than the ones that have been planted earlier. So it just shows you how much more moisture that early planting actually had.
Yeah, better established root systems, and maybe they got a little bit of a leg up, I guess.
Something I noticed in the honey, I believe it was 2 years ago, it was very dry, not quite as dry as this year, but I've noticed that the dry years, again, with my clover, alfalfa, and wildflower flow, in dry years, the honey has a more deep and rich color and a little more pronounced flavor. Sweet clover honey is very mild and light and clear. It's almost like water. But this year's honey, it's remarkably dark. It's got a very deep, rusty red color to it. So just the plants, like you're saying, the drought tolerant plants, I would imagine that's kind of why.
And you know what? I should have mentioned this earlier, but all of you guys that are producing honey, and I don't care what you're doing with it, but if you're selling it, even to family and friends, if you're doing craft sales, if you're doing flea markets or farmers markets, or you've got a little side business on the side, the price of honey right now globally as a commodity is at a really good, solid, high price. There is a big demand for good quality honey. If you're selling ice cream pails for 25 bucks, give your head a shake and raise it a lot, because $2.65 in the barrel is the current price that's being offered to commercial beekeepers. You can easily be selling an ice cream pail for 45 bucks off your front porch. Manitoba honey is considered some of the best honey in Canada, and Canadian honey is considered some of the best honey in the world. Do not fire sale your stuff. Don't do it.
I've got a picture of Manuka, New Zealand honey is selling for $160 a liter.
Yeah, it's too bad it tastes like dirt. But
It's
you know what?
Buckwheat.
Well, anything does. Manuka honey, although, is that's the unicorn of honey. It's only produced in Australia and New Zealand. It's considered a crown asset. You cannot be exported in barrels. It can only be exported packaged. And yeah, absolutely. It is. If you see it on the store shelves, because occasionally I've seen it in Superstore, it's garbage. It's not. Labonte should be sued. You can actually find Manuka honey for sale in Costco, but yeah, you're looking at $33 for a 500 gram jar. It's ridiculously expensive. There's some health properties there. Yeah, you know, make your own decisions. I'm not going to comment further, but it is the unicorn of honey. And if you get into New Zealand honey production, if you're ever on Reddit, there's a few good subreddits there. Like there's actual turf wars in New Zealand for colonies, for yards. It's that
Don't forget to mention the heli lifting with air lifts into higher locations.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if they can afford to actually hire a helicopter to lift it in, oh boy.
Yeah. And people don't realize how much it costs if you're hiring a helicopter for an hour. What do you think the average price is? It'll blow your mind. It can be
being a pilot, it's about $2,000 an hour.
Yeah. So think of the cost of airlifting colonies into higher unaccessible by road areas just for that. So when you take a look at how much Manuka honey commands on the market, I think their production costs might have a bit of a a relation to that, because that is insane.
Yeah.
But you know what? They wouldn't do it if there wasn't money in it. That's for sure.
But just one more comment on the honey part. There is actually a honey shortage across the world. Bad weather everywhere. There is no stockpiles anywhere anymore. Eastern Europe, Ukraine actually has been dry. A lot of areas did not produce much. They are getting themselves very high prices offered.
Yeah.
So, like you said before,
I would hang on to your honey stocks.
Don't fire sell your stuff. I mean,
yeah,
no, for sure. Because honest to God, if you are selling your honey at below, if you're fire selling your honey, you're just going to sell it out first. And then the next person that's $1 or more a bucket will sell out next. And in the end, that's going to get snapped up. I have had so many people, and I get this every year. Oh, I used to buy it for like $15 an ice cream pail. I said, well, tell me where, and I'll buy 100 because you can't
make money at that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. We have to recognize that the fruits of our labor, the amount of effort and energy that we put into this, provides a unique and high quality product that commands a specific price, and we aren't doing ourselves or our neighbors any benefit by giving it away. There's been so many times where, because of international price fixing and large packer, I'll use a polite word, tomfoolery, dilution has really made beekeepers really has really hit the amount of bread they can put on their table. I think this is the new era where, because counterfeit honey is easier to detect, and climate change as well, where there is more droughts in honey producing countries, where honey is actually coming into an age where it will be sold for what it's truly worth. And that's a benefit to absolutely everybody. And I buy a large quantity of honey every year because I don't produce anywhere near as much as I sell. And I'm saying that honestly, where I'm happy to see beekeepers getting paid for a good price for what they deserve.
I think if I can throw something in, John, and encouraging people to respect their prices and respect their product and their hard work. Just one question you can ask yourself is does your customer want cheap honey, or does your customer want your honey? And there's a really easy way to figure that out. And I've vowed when I started to always be the most expensive honey that I see. And, maybe not way higher than the top honey, but never I never let anybody sell for more than I sell for. And in 7 years, I've been told twice that my honey's too expensive. And people are falling all over themselves to get the, and add things, value added customer service, quality guarantees, that kind of stuff, satisfaction guarantees, stuff like that. Like you don't have to. Any fool can give away a product. It takes courage and ingenuity to actually sell a product like Manuka, build a brand like Manuka and sell it for, what was it, $30-some for 500 grams.
Yeah. And just because it's unique and where it grows, but
you can do it.
The same thing goes for commercial beekeepers, where producing honey takes money. And if you're in debt and you've got bills due and employees to pay, there's been a history of exploitation by large packers like McCormick and Billy B, where they have been shut out of the market, and then suddenly they're getting paid much less. And a lot of it was because of they were able to blend a lot of offshore honey into it a lot more easily than they can now. I'm so happy that Manitoba beekeepers on the commercial side are going to be able to get paid what their product is worth, because it's about sustainability. We cannot have a thriving beekeeping industry, whether it's commercial or hobbyist or backyard, if honey is worth nothing. It's very important that people are able to not only enjoy beekeeping as a hobby and as a learning experience, but in the end, that hobby has to get paid for. If no one's going to be wanting to pour hundreds or thousands of dollars into even a hobbyist operation and not get some kind of a carrot at the end of that stick. So it is a good thing to see, for sure.
Well, it's not just that. It's to be able to see that, even the bees themselves they're not being exploited, and not because exploitation of any agricultural industry is synonymous with poison and lack of respect for the industry.
True. I did. There was something in chat here, and I've gotten this question myself, so I want to run it by whoever's hanging on here. Is crystallized frames. I know in the spring it's a good opportunity to put out some crystallized frames or winter feed frames, just for robbing, just as a nectar source, or just to clean out the cells for the previous season. But people will turn around and have honey that's in the super, but it's not capped and it's not ripe. People will have crystallized frames that they didn't get to use this fall. And I guess what the concern is if you're putting out honey that's partially crystallized or crystallized to rob out, are you going to get that crystallization now in your wintering colonies and cause problems down the road because now they have to reliquefy? So Brad Waldemar, can you want to wade in on that and give some advice there?
Well, I'll definitely defer to Waldemar before my comments.
I don't think Waldemar has to deal with a lot of crystallized honey. I don't think.
Well, I don't either, to be honest.
I don't, but I'm usually experimenting with a lot of stuff, and first and foremost, I want to kind of advise everybody: if you're in an area where you actually had a canola flow and your queens or your hives are not fully use the brood chamber, make sure that the side frames that you have in there are not canola filled, because if it does, it doesn't help the bees. They cannot live on that. That's like Rial mentioned in the beginning. But I ran an experiment and I actually took crystallized canola honey and after extraction, and I fed it back to the bees. So I never actually had an issue there. It did not, I think The reason being is they basically blended it together with the rest of it. And so there was no problems for them actually to consume. And matter of fact, if you feed a certain amount of honey with, when you feed sugar water, actually it becomes to be a higher quality food because the enzymes are already in the honey and it will actually invert the sugar syrup right there. So no, it's not an issue. It should not be an issue, especially if you don't put too much out and give them time. And if they actually have a water source that you can liquefy it with, it shouldn't have an impact.
Is there any risk of wax moth?
Not outside. What wax moths are only first and foremost go for the black stuff, for the black frames, the brood frames. And secondly, even those, if they're exposed, if there's airflow, wax moths don't like an airflow.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
On the topic of wax moths, storing your empty honey supers, take some care. A lot of people don't know what a wax moth looks like. You'll find them sometimes hanging out just underneath your telescoping lids or on the sides of your supers. Google image search that. Crush them when you find them. Wax moth infestations are, they have a hard time getting into the colony. A strong colony is usually easily able to rebuff them. But I have lost a colony from wax moths, and I swear to God, it's the most disgusting thing you'll ever see. It is absolutely revolting. Think of an oversized maggot on steroids, and that's what the larvae are, and they just cause nothing but repugnant destruction wherever they crawl through.
They will eat anything. They will
Yeah.
eat plastic, they eat wood, they eat polystyrene, they eat wax, they eat pollen. They're crazy. They will drill right through the wood.
Wow.
Okay, just a small correction. You're absolutely right what you said there, but there's two types of wax moths. There's the small and the big one. So the big one actually does exactly what you described, where the small one will only damage to the frames.
And that being said, there's been studies on how cold it has to be to kill them. And a lot of beekeepers do rely on any of the eggs being destroyed, and when they store their honey supers into winter storage, that, because of temperature fluctuations in the winter now, doesn't always it doesn't always fit the bill. So storage again is your first level of defense. As having been a victim of losing some colonies to those, I mean, I cannot say that be vigilant against them, because the destruction is absolutely horrific, and it's never a situation you want to find yourself in. I think the Smiths once had what they thought was a little bit of wax moth issues in one of the semi-trailers they were storing supers in, and it ended up they lost hundreds of supers to wax moth damage. And just cleaning that up is, honestly, I would just write a check and burn it before I had to do that again.
That's punishment enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Well, the biggest issue is actually the attitude that I think prevails in North America towards the honey supers. A honey super is considered to be something where the bees put honey in, but it's not the case in Europe. You don't have any dark frames in a honey super. There is no brood frames in a honey super. So, and if you have that scenario, what I actually run in my operation, you don't have an issue with your honey supers.
Yeah, they
Because
don't like white frames, right? Like,
no, there's nothing for them to eat. Actually, what they need a little bit of pollen and actually the residue that is left when the bees are hatching.
Yeah.
those cocoons that are left behind, that's what they thrive on. So basically, if you don't have that available for them, the frames are not interested for them. So if you train yourself not to have dark frames in your honey supers, you will not have an issue.
Now, and again, I mean, and I commend your operation for this, because the fact that you like nuke production is a big part of your of what you do. The ability to cycle frames out to reduce residues in your wax, to reduce the amount of dark frames in your operation. I swear to God, every commercial beekeeper should have a nuke business on the side, because there's so much more benefits than financial to doing that. It's just a smart way to run your whole overall operation.
FYI, you talked about the honey price. I just touched on something else. I couldn't believe it when I saw the number. It was $67 for a queen this spring. $67. and even in the middle of the summer on some websites, I still saw enough queens for $49.99. So guys, give your head a shake when you sell your $20 bucket of honey.
Absolutely. And again, I mean, especially for the hobbyist, people think that queen rearing is this high-end magic. It's a skill. It's a skill like anything else, and it's worth doing well and investing the time and the practice into. But any beekeeper worth his salt should know how to raise their own queens after a couple of years. It provides you with that flexibility. It provides you with being able to correct those mistakes. And even if you're at a point where you don't want to raise queens, you know, when you see supersedure cells or multiple supersedure cells, or if you're able to turn around and take, you know, if you open up your single and you see 2 supersedure cells on 2 different frames, taking that one frame out and making a nuke out of it and starting a nuke, even if you don't need it, is almost like a queen in the bank, right? At the end of the year, you can always incorporate those bees and that queen into whatever remaining colonies you have. But, you know, it just goes to show the overall flexibility and being able to have control over a queen supply. Makes your business a lot more profitable and makes your hobby a lot more self-sustainable. And again, Waldemar's right about the honey price. If you're giving it away, you know, if a queen is worth 50, you know, it's a direct relation to the cost of what you should be charging for your honey, because it becomes a cost of production. And even if you can raise your own queens for free, there is nothing for free. That's still effort and time and skill set that you put into your operation. Don't sell your labor short for anybody ever, because it makes a difference between financial sustainability and not. So keep that in mind.
Just want to say, it's not difficult to learn, but anybody that saw a dog on a chain, that's basically a beekeeper that raises queens. Because you don't have an option to go anywhere. You have to be on time, and queen raising is so time sensitive. So if you miss it, you just did it for nothing.
Well,
that's exactly the advice I would give. I'm so glad you said that, because I've said that to so many people this summer. Oh, how do you raise your queens? And that's exactly what I'll tell them, is you need to be right on top of that timing. It's not rocket science, but you cannot let your guard down on that timing. They will whip you all summer and schedule your every move.
So I guess no fishing and no golf for you guys, eh?
Nope. Queens only.
Yeah.
Listen, there is the winter time. I love ice fishing.
Yeah, no, it's all time. You know what? You take your lifestyle and you convert it to seasonal pleasures and occupations. You know, but you have to turn around and not compromise your time in the summer for distractions, because you know you will pay in more ways than one. I have students that have gone on vacation for 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks of August, and I'm just shaking my head, because it's like, I understand there's employee pressures, there's family pressures, there's spousal pressures, but honest to God, it all comes down to the success of beekeeping is a very set formula, and timing is a big part of that. And if you choose to compromise it, you've chosen to compromise it, and the effect will not be positive. It's just the way beekeeping works, and it's the hardest lesson for people to learn, because it does not treat your convenience with any sort of gift. It'll punish you and whip you, like Brad said, if you are slack, or if you're not really paying attention to your calendar.
I was recently told, John, by a trusted authority, that there's an entire subset of beekeepers in Manitoba who had a very poor subsequent season after they decided to attend Mondia the second week in September. Was that 2 years ago? So they all decided to take a week off their job, and things went poorly after that, because they didn't get their work done.
Yeah, it is. It is what it is, and you cannot take your eye off the ball. You just can't. And that scales up to every level of beekeeping. I mean, the really large commercial guys that have employees can buy that flexibility. But if you don't have someone taking care of business while you're taking care of business, then part of your taking care of business is not there. And that is just the way it is. Bees don't care. Bees have a whole different agenda than you. They're not here to make you honey. You might own them, but they don't recognize that. It's like having a cat. Do you really own a cat? You don't really own bees either.
No.
They're going to do what they want to do and what
That's
their
right.
nature tells them to do. And it's not to make you honey. It's to make more bees, and not at the time of your choosing. And you have to accept that when you get into this. Simple
Someone
as that.
said to me a few years ago, when I was getting into beekeeping, they said beekeeping isn't hard to do, but it is easy to fail. And I thought, that is, the more I get into it, I think those were wise words. And you can do all of those things wrong that you were talking about, John. You can do all of that stuff wrong. You just won't succeed. That's all. You know.
I'm close to 50 years of beekeeping, and I'm gonna tell you something. There's not a single year where you don't learn something new.
Yep.
I've seen something this year I could not believe. I clipped my queen's wings so they cannot fly, and this one queen decided to swarm while I was there, and I knew she was in full egg production. She had a clipped wing, she was marked and everything, so they chose the biggest oak, and I figured, well, there must have been a different queen that hatched. You know what? I collected that swarm and I was actually hiving it. It was only the one queen that was in there, and she had a clipped wing. So if an animal really wants to do what an animal wants to do, you can almost do nothing. You can do almost nothing. That's absolutely unbelievable. If I would have not seen it with my own eyes, I would have said that's not possible.
Wow.
The bees carry her up there.
I have no
That's
idea,
amazing.
Brad. I have no idea. I cannot tell you. Like, she basically bolted out because they had 2 cells on one frame. And once I actually saw the swarm going out and checked them later, both of them were not hatched yet. And when you pull, usually when you pull everything apart, the temperature in the hive drops. It kind of also triggers the hatching of the queens. So basically, at that time, both of them hatched out, and there was only two queens in there.
Waldemar, I want to describe a behavior to you that I noticed this summer. See if what you think of it. What I was doing was I was directly introducing laying queens to a queenless colony. And so I'd have this laying queen in a 4-frame nuke. I'd have a moderately sized 10-frame queenless colony. I'd cage the queen, walk across the yard, and set this queen on the top bars of this queenless colony just to check for how they respond to her.
Okay.
And universally, they responded well. But I noticed a behavior I've never heard talked about, and that was the first 1 or 2 bees that climbed up on that cage and stuck whatever they stick through the cage, whether it's their proboscis or their antennae or whatever, and touches that queen, they would poke through that hole and just instantaneously poke that queen and turn around and walk off the cage and find another bee and then touch that bee and, as if to say, look what I found, and then turn to another bee and go, look what I found. And that would start the chain reaction of all those bees climbing up in that cage to try and touch that new queen.
Well, they were collecting the pheromone of her. She must have been in a pretty good shape.
Yeah, they were newly laying queens. They were
like how
young.
old? Like how many days did she have capped brood?
Just. Yeah.
Just. Okay. Well,
yeah.
Then she was actually almost in full production of pheromones, because you do not take out queens to introduce anywhere before she actually does not have capped brood, because she does not reach. But yeah, no, that's absolutely typical. Matter of fact, yeah, I usually don't say it out loud, but I don't use cages to introduce queens. My queens are running off my finger into the hive.
Yeah. It was just I didn't have the balls to do that. I knew theoretically it should work, and I think you're right. Some of the queens weren't laying as long, and they weren't aggressive to the queens. But later on, checking that hive, they had not accepted her. So I think those are the queens that weren't laying as long as some of the others. There was about I did 20 of them. There was about 17 that were successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, usually that works very well. And if you go that route and introduce without a cage, you need to have a little bit of a honey flow. That has to be at least a little bit of a honey flow. If you have a severe honey flow, then that's even better, because all the field force is out, and all you have just the juvenile bees in the hive, and they accept anything. So
this was July.
Well, that's a good time. I requeened 6 supers high hives that way. I knew that the queen was old enough to get out, and it was a full honey flow. I picked up the 6 supers with my easy loader, found the queen, took her out, put the young queen that was laying already for 14 days on the corner there, and they licked her, fed her. 2 days later, I came to check, and it looked like there was not a beat missing.
So no considerable queenless period. That's amazing.
Not at all, because there's a university in Eastern Germany by the name of Armbruster, and there is a professor there. He says that's the biggest myth that actually been developed. And if you go back far enough and look up the books from Brother Adam, he was the one that was swapping queens between hives. So you need to consider something else. If you actually make a hive queenless, this hive is in a state of disarray. There's no order. A new queen that comes in has to create that order again. The longer they are without the queen, the more disorder is there. So basically, if you can introduce her on a favorable situation, you will not miss a beat. Matter of fact, all of my hives I'm going through right now in August, and anything that I don't like or is too old gets requeened right now, because that queen will give me full 100% in the springtime, and I will not have an issue with the hives wintering. That's something that also is not being addressed here. If you have an issue with low brood production, dearth, and all of that, only a young, viable queen can handle that. You cannot have a grandma expecting from her to run your marathon, you know.
Yeah, I think maybe for everyone who's listening to this, we need to qualify. These are laying queens, correct? These are
That's
not
right.
caged queens that have been caged for a day or a week or from some far off land.
No,
They are a laying queen.
you go, you pick it out of that mating box, out of the nuke, out of the hive, and then you introduce her right away. You cannot have her even caged for more than 2 hours. You cannot have that. Basically, from
Right.
one unit to the next unit, that's what you do.
Yeah, I only caged mine just for handling to get across the yard with that. I'm not good with fine dexterity, my fingers to carry queens around, but they were in the queen for
Well,
2 or 3 minutes probably.
I manage usually to hold 2 queens within one hand, so that's kind of fun. Well, you get
I don't think I'll ever do that.
you got the feeling once you don't want to squash them, you know. But no, it's possible, definitely. And you described the situation that I have been working already for the last 25 years with. So it's nothing new for me, because like I said, in '69, I think Brother Adam released those books, and it stated already in there. But once you do it yourself, then you start finding all the lectures on it, and you find those people that have actually done it. You know.
Exactly. We don't want to take the chance on that precious queen, and we don't want to do it a different way and whatnot. But a lot of that stuff is just do it because we're told to do it, and it's not necessarily that way. And
Well,
usually, if you really think about it, usually when people are requeening something or people are introducing a queen to a colony, it's not a laying queen. It's a queen that's been caged for a while.
Yep.
You know, because they've gotten it from somewhere else. So at least they've driven the car to somewhere, got this caged queen that was caged earlier today and taken it home. And there's a number of hours that pass. It's not a laying queen anymore. So now those principles don't apply.
It's pretty hard to convince people of this, because I always say, when do you want to make your nuke? When do you want to introduce that queen? Oh, maybe tomorrow. I said, why don't you come tomorrow for that queen? Well, then I have to drive out, and then I have to make my nuke. And well, you just have to just basically cut your chance in half to actually have a successful queen acceptance. You know, those pheromones, basically, if I pick up that queen from a mating box, it doesn't have to be a big mating box. She just has to be long enough in there, a couple of weeks, and if you pick her up, she probably still spits an egg or two out in your hand. That's how fresh they are. You know, you need to have a fresh fish, otherwise it starts to smell.
Yeah. Another thing I was doing.
Well, yeah, you know, I'm capturing that soundbite because that's very well said.
Another thing I was doing was introducing virgins. The virgins would emerge in my incubator. I would cage them and introduce them to a queenless nuke, again within minutes. Well, I mean, maybe within 20 minutes, and that worked fantastic.
You know why?
Well, I can imagine. What you tell me the principles behind that.
Well, basically, it's just a emerged baby. That's
what I was thinking.
It's a bee, has no smell, has not even the appearance of a queen. So basically, when you introduce that animal into the whatever you introduce it to, you can probably introduce it into a hive too. They don't recognize it as a queen, and
they were visibly ambivalent to the virgins. I would place the virgin, she'd walk out on the top bars. The bees would just completely ignore her.
Yep.
And
well, basically, this is how I start out my mating nukes in the springtime with virgin queens, because there's only 2 units or 2 entities that keep a bunch of bees together. It's brood and a queen. So basically, when I start out my mating units in the springtime, this is what I do. I shake bees, I portion them out, and they get a virgin queen, and then they sit for 48 hours in a dark, cold place with food, and then they go in the evening out, and basically I don't look at them till the next 10 days. And after 10 days, that queen is mated and she starts laying. And then you can harvest her after 10 days, and while she was laying, and then you introduce another cell into the same unit. Basically, that's how you establish your mating nukes.
Nice. And that I have had a challenge getting my minis ramped up and operating, so I'll try and remember that for next summer.
It works pretty good, but do we have a couple of minutes? I want to share a story.
Well, you know what? At 10 to 11 at night, we have all the time that the rest of the people have. So I'm not going anywhere. So yeah, by all means, this is the job's done. This is all gravy. So by all means,
it's been a long time since we've sat around and told bee stories.
And whatever you want to share, we're very grateful for. So by all means, go ahead.
Okay. Last year was actually a pretty good fall for the mating nukes not to being robbed out after you harvest the last queens. And I mentioned that before. So basically what I did, I shook all the mating nukes out, all the brood was hatched. And so I collected a significant amount of basically live mass or bees that I could actually establish 14 hives. And that time still had mated queens. So I just took brood frames, black frames with no brood on it, and I put 1.5 kilograms of bees in each one of them. So it was 14 units that I put together for the winter, and then I started feeding them. That was already October. Now you need to understand what I'm doing here. I'm going against all the stuff that you just guys talked about, winter bees, mating time, and all of that. This is like totally something different. I'm just trying to recycle bees. So I put those 14 together, and October was pretty cold. So I actually put an empty super on top, and I hung a bulb in there so it kept it warm so they could actually pick up the syrup. Come February, I pulled actually one frame out and I reduced them to 9 frames. In February, we had a nice warm spell. By that time, actually, I discovered one queenless colony. So I used one of the nukes for that queenless colony. And one of those units did not make it. So I ended up with 12 in the springtime. They actually were in full possession or full cover of 8 frames, and they took off in the springtime like somebody shot a bullet. So I made from each one of those units, I made 2 nukes in the springtime.
That's incredible.